Today I'm going to show you how to set top dead center on the damper, on the crankshaft, the cams, as well as how to set lash on an Ecoboost or a Duratec engine. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to check top dead center on the crankshaft. Everything we do here is dependent on having an accurate top dead center on the crankshaft. Ford has a real clever idea on how to set this up. So they have this little 10mm headed bolt, it's actually a 10mm thread also, that goes in the side of the block just below crank center line. Counterweight on the crank swings over and will hit the timing tool, which is a stop, just threads in the side of the block. The counterweight comes around and hits it. When the counterweight is up against it, the number one rod is at top dead center. So we're going to insert this in the block and we will thread that all the way in. Once we have it threaded in, we can verify that we're up against, you can hear it, the counterweight hitting. That's how we know we're top dead center on the crankshaft. The next thing you'll want to check, just to double check it, is you'll want to check top dead center for the timing wheel. Now the timing wheel on a Duratec and an Ecoboost has no key from the factory, so they can spin all the way around. So Ford and Mazda have come up with this clever way of setting top dead center on them. They put a hole in the spoke that is towards the bottom. It's 180 degrees down from top dead center. So there's a hole and there is a 6mm thread in the front cover. So you put the bolt through the damper into the hole. So that's what we'll do here. Once we thread that in, you can see simple goes in by hand. That's all. So you know that the trigger wheel is timed correctly. Now we have a keyed crank in this engine. The damper and the timing chain gear are all keyed, so you can't really adjust them, but we just did this to double check our work. You might want to do that every time, just as a precaution to make sure everything was done correctly. So we're going to remove this trigger wheel alignment bolt, and then we will leave the TDC tool in the crankshaft so that we can move on to our next step. The next step will be checking your cam timing. While you have the crank up against the stop for the TDC, you will want to slide the cam timing tool in the back of the cams. There's a slot in each cam that is offset up. So when you're at the top dead center number 1, the slots should be above the surface of the valve cover. If you're on top dead center number 4, meaning 1 revolution off on the crank, you would have the slots below the surface of the head. So if you see that your slots are offset down, you need to rotate the crank one more time. So you pull the tool out, rotate the crank, put the tool back in, set it against your stop. Then you go ahead and slide in the cam timing tool. As you can see, it slides right in. Now, an Ecoboost has a different tool than the Duratec, but it's the same style. So a Duratec has one long solid tool that is straight, since both cams are the same length. Now on an Ecoboost, the exhaust cam sticks out longer for the high pressure fuel pump. That's why you have this tool that has the weird shape. The last thing we're going to show you today is how to set lash or check lash on these engines. You'll have to take out the stop, the timing tool in the crank, so that you can rotate the crank past it. If you don't do that and you go and rotate the crankshaft, the counterweight will come through and push against it and it will stop. It won't let you rotate the engine over in order to check lash. Now you always want to rotate the engine in the direction of rotation. So you're always going to go in clockwise rotation around the crank. The first thing we'll do from top dead center, we're going to start on the exhaust cam. Now the Ecoboost cams that are sold by our company, the Esslinger Ecoboost cams, will have a lash requirement of 10 to 12 thousandths. So we're going to start with our feeler gauge setup. We have a 10 and a 12. So as long as it's not more than 12 and it is more than 10, so it has to be less than 12, more than 10, and we're good. So we're going to rotate the cam over until the lobes are pointing straight up away from the bucket. That's not quite straight up and down, but more like maybe 20 degrees offset, so they're on the same valve angle. And first thing we'll do, we're going to check 12 thousandths to check and see if we have too much lash. So they can't fit a 12 thou feeler gauge in, so we know that it's not more than 12. Now we're going to go to our 10 thou and we'll slide that in, and we'll slide it in the other one. So they're both more than 10, less than 12, all good. So we can move on to our next cylinder. We'll go from cylinder number 3. We're going to go over to cylinder number 4. Again, looking that the lobe is pointing straight up away from the buckets. Start off again with our number 12, or our 12 thou feeler gauge. Doesn't go in either one. And our 10 thou does. So we know again it's more than 10, less than 12. We're going to rotate this over again one more time. We'll come back to the cylinder number 2 exhaust. We're just following the lobes. As we rotate the crank, we're going 180 degrees on the crank, turns the cam 90 degrees since it's half the speed, right? So number 2, exhaust lobes pointing up, we'll check them. 12 doesn't go, 10 does. Good, now we can move on to the number 1 cylinder, and we can call this good. Let's check 12. So 12 doesn't go, and now we need to check 10, and there we go. So more than 10, less than 12. So the exhaust cam all set, lash is perfect. We can move on to the intake. So while you're here, you'll notice from the number 1 exhaust, the next lobes that will come into phase would be the number 2 intakes. We'll rotate them just a few degrees so that the lobe is pointing up. Now we're about 20 degrees past straight up and down. So 20 degrees maybe towards the intake side. To get the lobes straight up and down from the bucket, we're going to move over to our feeler gauges that are set at 6 and 8. For the Esslinger cams, they're 6 and 8 thousandths, so the lash has to be more than 6, less than 8. So the first thing we're going to do, start off with our 8, and it doesn't go. So we'll move over to our 6, and 6 goes. So 6 is a little bit snug in the number 4 lobe back, but we are within lash. It's 6 thousandths, whereas the other lobes set to 7 thousandths. So we'll move on. The next, after the number 2, is going to come up to our number 1. We'll move the crank 180 degrees to get to the lobes. So now that we have that, we'll check them and see here. So 8 thou doesn't go, 6 thou does, and move on to the next cylinder. Next cylinder coming up is the number 3. So move on to our 8, doesn't go, 6 does. So we're good between 6 and 8. Move this one more half revolution so we can get the number 4 lobes pointed up again, and between 8 and 6, and we're good. So there you have it. You've learned how to set top dead center on the crank, how to set top dead center on the damper, how to check that your cam timing is set correctly, and how to set lash. Thank you for tuning in to the Esslinger Racing channel. Keep checking back for more videos.